Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Proclaim Peace podcast, where we are talking about how the Old Testament can teach us to be better peacemakers. I'm Patrick Mason. I am here, as always, with Jen Thomas. Jen, how's it going?
Going, Patrick. It's
It's
been
going.
a rough start to the new year for the universe at large, but we are going to put a stake in the ground for peace.
It is going. Sometimes that's the best we can do, right? So, well, I love the conversations that we're having this season, and there's so much rich material. And today we're going to be talking about the Adam and Eve story. And in some ways, like, I feel like you could do an entire podcast season just on the Adam and Eve story. There's a reason it is so archetypal.
Yep.
I mean, it's not that long, right?
Yeah.
But there's a reason we've been telling this story for like thousands of years. There's a reason, like it's just so pregnant with meaning. But we're going to keep talking about it today to pull out some principles of peacemaking.
And I think there is a reason also, a corollary to that. Is there a reason that people have tried to flatten it out or diminish it? Because I think there's just an extraordinary level of complexity there to help us as we navigate our mortal experience. It is in the interest often of non-godlike forces to kind of flatten things out and make them less complex and overly simplistic. And I really appreciate the way we're going to jump into this story today and deal with some of the complexity, because I think that one of the things that we have to acknowledge, if we want to be peacemakers and we want to help resolve conflict with those around us, is that often we're going to have conflict with people, not because they're doing something wrong per se, but because they have a different moral vision than we do, or they are trying to achieve good, using different means, or they are growing in ways that maybe make us uncomfortable. And all of those things, I think, emerge from the Adam and Eve story and are related to how we're going to manage conflict in situations where it isn't between good and evil, but it's between good people trying to get to a good end, but using different means.
Yeah. And sometimes that's like the hardest kind of peacemaking to do,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Is not between good and evil. It's not Luke and Darth Vader or something like that. But it turns out Darth Vader is kind of complicated too. But the people have different values.
Yeah.
People bring different experiences. People bring different perspectives to the table. And that's so much of what drives conflict.
Yes.
And that is why I think that the complexity of the Adam and Eve story so useful to reflect on and to think with at a very foundational level as peacemakers, to think about what is it that we're about.
Well, and I think that sometimes it's really easy for me to say, okay, I'm going to have conflict with someone who I know is diametrically opposed to me, or who I know wants different things for the world than I do. But sometimes the biggest tension that I feel with people, and I don't know how to resolve it, is when I'm like, well, I thought we shared the same vision of God, or I thought we shared the same vision of Zion, or I thought we were both trying to honor God. And it turns out you're mad at me for what I did, or I'm mad at you for what you did. And so I'm hoping that this conversation that we have today will sort of give us some peace around that and acknowledge that this is just sort of the way things are, again, the way they were designed to be, that this story is at the beginning of the creation for a very good reason, and that we can all learn to have more patience with each other and love as we grow. So we have a special guest here with us today to help us accomplish that. Mallory Everton is a comedian, writer, and actor. She's best known for her roles in the popular sketch comedy show Studio C, which is still, years later, regularly quoted by my family. She currently co-hosts the Soloist podcast, which highlights the complexities of forming relationships and being single in a family-centered church. Mallory is incredibly creative, and she's a delight to talk to, and we're so excited to bring her here in front of you today. Welcome, Mallory.
All right, Mallory, it is awesome to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Proclaim Peace.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. So we always start with the same question, and it's amazing how many different answers we get. But how do you, Mallory Everton, how do you define peace?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I had to think about it for a little while. Immediately, my brain went to the hymn, Where Can I Turn for Peace? And the way I've always thought about peace as an individual. And I think that the best way that I could describe how it feels to me is a deep state of trust. And I think maybe in addition, an acceptance of the present, if not an embracing of the present. To be able to really trust that this is exactly how it should be, that I'm totally safe even if I'm not safe, if that makes sense. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
that's how it feels for me to have personal peace. And then when I'm thinking about it in relationship, I actually think trust still applies. I think that it's when we can trust each other, that we have enough of a shared vision. And I'm not saying that we all agree or that we like each other even, but that we have enough of a shared vision that we can trust that this is what you're going to do and this is what I'm going to do. That in relationship, we're going to respect each other's boundaries, that we're not going to harm each other on purpose. That to me describes what peace is between people and in a collective, is that there's a level of trust, that we can trust in each other's behavior, that there are some agreed upon truths or principles that we're adhering to.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I actually think it is a really, really great way to jump into what we want to talk about today. So we find ourselves we want to talk a little bit about the story of Adam and Eve, and specifically how different people make different decisions in the same circumstance, right? And that they might think that they are each doing the right thing. The other person might feel that is actually not the right choice. And to me, I love that this idea that you've talked about, that relationally, that the peace is relational in many ways, that we find peace when we have a high sense of trust with other people and can know that they are going to act in our best interest. And that's hard. So we're going to jump right into it, because this is the original hard conflict, right? It's the origin story of kind of how conflict to some degree entered the world. So let's talk about it. And I'm really interested in hearing, particularly from your perspective as a storyteller, right? This is one of the things you're so good at. So what strikes you most about this story insofar as it relates to conflict, the story of Adam and Eve? If you're telling story, if you're highlighting narrative, what jumps out at you?
A couple of things. I mean, first of all, I just think as a performer and Eve is the character in this story that every actor would want to play. And I think that's exciting. To me, that's like, there are so many different books and articles that you could read about women in Hollywood being so bored with the female characters offered to them on the page. Eve is not like that. She is a character that anyone would kill to play because she makes the climactic choice. She is the one who really sets off the domino effect. And it's like the domino effect of all human existence. So it's pretty epic. And the other thing that I think of immediately when I think of this story from the perspective of my background is just that we are so bored by scenes where there's an argument between two people and it's so clear who's right and who's wrong. We love a movie where the villain actually has a pretty good point, and Satan has a pretty good point. And in fact, he might actually be right in some, maybe not fully right, but she ends up going with what Satan suggests. And it's because it's a pretty good point.
His motive might not be right. He might not want what's best for her, and I think that's sometimes inherent in making difficult decisions, is that those two things can be mixed together. There might be the right action, but the wrong motive. There might be,
Oh my gosh. And that's one of the complexities of human existence, is just, can you do the right thing for the wrong reason or the wrong thing for the right reason? Yeah. And that is what she's doing, potentially doing the wrong thing for the right reason. At least that's the way we talk about it in our theology, in Mormonism, which I think is very refreshing. But I think that what it really draws us into is spiritual maturity, the ability to be able to hold contradictory things at the same time, to be forced into paradox, and also to embrace our humanness. I mean, everything in this it really, really forces you to. I had somebody on Sunday say that the Bible isn't for children. I thought that was such a good point. And this is one of those things. It's like, this is a very hard thing to teach a child, that you contain the entire multitude of existence. You are both very capable of great, great good and great, great bad, and you deserve grace no matter where you are on the wheel. That's one of the things that we take from this as well. But yeah, the part of the reason this story is so good is because both sides have a pretty good point. They have a pretty compelling argument, and so we end up with a really meaty scene here.
So how do you think about, I like the way you framed this, and thinking about this as a movie or as a play or something like this. And So talk about the Adam-Eve relationship. How would you sketch out, or how do you describe that kind of conflict? What's, we've talked about Satan and Eve and what he offers her, but there's Adam in the mix too.
Man, I mean, from a themes standpoint, my brain immediately goes to the fact that we have to make our own choices, but we don't live in a vacuum. And so there's almost no way that your choices, even just in your marriage, don't matter. You might think it's just between you two people, or that this is just about me. This is just about me and God. And yes, it is, but it's always also about all of us. It's always also about all of us and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we make choices from a very deep values place within us, because they will have a ripple effect. And as much as possible, it's nice to feel purposeful with the ripple effect we're having on the world. And that's what I first think of with Adam and Eve, that her choices affect him immediately and directly, but also she does need to make her choices. It's not really intimacy if she's not being her full self, and this is a part of who she is. This question she has, this choice that she made, it's a part of who she is. And if she didn't bring that to him, then they wouldn't be in true intimacy with each other.
And of course, his choices, if they just did Adam all the time, right? That would constrain her agency too, right?
Yes,
so they're both making choices that are going to impede on the other person's sense of values.
Yes.
And the way that their primary orientation towards the world and towards difficult ethical problems.
Can I ask you a question too? Sorry, Jen, what were you
No, I
going
was
to say?
just going to say, and even limit in significant ways potentially their ability to expand into their full capacity. Like if you make that decision, okay, this is a decision between me and God, without considering how that impact, the downstream impact that might have on a partner, you can say, well, I made the right decision. But I love the way that you're talking about the fact that in conflict and in these really difficult decisions, we need to be aware of the impact of even what we think might be the morally right thing to do on the people around us. And I think we can't, even if we make the decision we were always going to make, I don't know that we can argue that it was completely moral if we haven't done the godlike work of considering the impact.
Well, and I love the way Jennifer Finlayson Five talks about this. She gave me some language for this several years ago, which she often talks about making choices that are of the highest good for all. And the highest good includes you, which I think is very, very easy from a Christian perspective to not include yourself in the highest good. But it actually is not good to not include yourself in that equation. Like if she were to say, I'm having this instinct, but I'm going to violate it completely, I'm not going to share it, and I'm definitely not going to do it. There are downstream effects for complete violation of self. And it's a very complex topic, because sometimes when we're talking about trusting God, it feels like trusting self. And sometimes when we're talking about trusting God, it feels like trusting institution, or it feels like it's trusting sort of cultural or community wisdom. And we kind of always have to be the ones to make that call. Like, what does trusting God mean in this situation? Because it's not always the same. The question I was going to ask, just in terms of Adam and Eve, you know what I didn't really notice before, but when I reread the Genesis and Moses versions of this story before doing this podcast, I was struck by the fact that the instruction about the tree is given to Adam before Eve is created. And so, I'd never really considered that possibly she had not received her own witness from God specifically. I mean, she probably had, because God is in the garden dwelling with them, but that's the way the story is written. So there's something also to consider about the fact that perhaps she had a different perspective. She wasn't there for as long. She didn't name all of the creatures. Like, she was a different creature than he was. And I think that's really interesting too, from a character perspective.
That is interesting. And I also, where my mind immediately goes to, is that it's sort of easy to keep all the rules when you're all by yourself.
It's so true.
Like I was an amazing parent until I had kids.
Yeah.
And so that there is that kind of, stalwart righteousness, which is kind of easy outside of relationship.
Man, and isn't it just there's so much beauty and perfection in philosophy. It's so nice to philosophize, isn't it?
Right.
And that's what we can do a lot of the time. But philosophy applied to your messy life is often very messy. I would say maybe always very messy.
Well, and I want to go back to kind of what you asked and tease that apart a little bit, because I think, We are obviously talking about peacemaking on this podcast. And I think you've captured something really important that we should consider. And that is that often we feel like we have a sense of what is right because of the information that has been given to us. But other people don't have the same information that we have often.
Yes.
They might have, that might be a negative. They might not have had a full vision. But I think and so we might be like, oh, well, they just don't know. And so, I've got to be aware of the fact that they might not know. And I think we often do that when we're trying to be compassionate in church about people that we see as not obeying the commandments. We're like, well, they just don't know. They haven't heard yet. They don't understand. But I think that goes both ways. I think we have to be aware of the fact that, Eve might not have gotten the instruction that Adam had gotten. We don't know. But also, Adam had a very different experience with life coming forth than Eve did. Eve's like,
yes.
Adam's like, well, maybe babies will appear. I don't know. Maybe that's how the animals came.
For sure.
Like, I don't know.
For
God
sure.
magicked them up. They're here. I named them. Good to go. And Eve didn't have that experience, probably for a very specific reason, because that would have been an error. And God didn't want her to have that false information that then would have led to her to be like sitting around waiting, where are my babies? Where's humans? And so I think sometimes it's really important to remember that, honestly, God gives us each different perspectives because he wants us to come together. He wants that to not be a source of conflict for us, but a place that we can come together and work things out harmoniously so that we actually in the process are becoming one, whether it's as a spouse or with our neighbors or with our other church members. If we all had the same information, we wouldn't go through that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, yes, it makes perfect sense. And actually, before we started recording, I had mentioned that I was a big fan of the Enneagram. And it's a way of making sense of, I guess the human population is one of the personality tests, but it feels like a little bit deeper. The way that Richard Rohr talks about the Enneagram is that all of the 9 personality types make up the full face of God, which is so similar to the way we talk about the body of Christ. And I think it's almost helpful for me sometimes to think that there's this beautiful thing that Brian McLaren said on the Faith Matters podcast, I think the most recent one, where he was talking about how being chosen is being called into service. And is it possible that we are being called to different truths to try and make the full face of God? That this person feels very called to delve more deeply into this thing. They feel irked by this question. When someone else feels like it would almost be a sin to even ask that question. And is it possible that we're called to these different areas to try and get our vision as people and as a human race closer to the vision of God? But we all we're called to our different parts. We're called into deep service to different parts of the truth. And I think that actually gives more lenience and patience for each other, and also more respect. Like, go over there and do your work. If that's what you're called to, I actually want to tell you that I believe in you and that I believe that you can help us understand this more, instead of being afraid because it's so different from what I feel called to.
So I love that vision. And the question is, how do we do that in a church? Okay. So let's even sort of telescope this outside of just a relationship between two people. But is there anything that this story tells us, any lessons that we can glean from it about how to have and how to navigate the kinds of conflicts that we see between personal revelation, right? This sense of calling that you've just mentioned, and of course that's bedrock for Latter-day Saints. That God can talk to me, God can talk to you, and God will, right?
And does. Yeah.
Yes.
That's, patriarchal blessings, right? It's like there's
Absolutely. And at the same time, we have institutions, and we have an institution with authority structures, with teachings, with commandments, with all these kinds of things, guidelines of how we should all live. So is there anything in the Adam and Eve story, Mallory, that when you look at it, that helps you think about navigating that conflict between personal revelation and institutional authority?
I think it's obvious from the story that the definition of maturity is being able to hold two contradictory truths at the same time. And I think also what the story makes me think about is that spiritual growth is unavoidable. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened in the garden if this didn't happen at this juncture. Don't you think it would have happened later? Don't you think like the questions that... Yes, exactly. Eventually, maybe it would have been a slightly different story. Adam and Eve and get into a massive spat, and like there's a knockout, drag out fight, and the pigs are involved or whatever. And you know what I mean? We don't get to know what would have happened if. But I do think that this is unavoidable, and I think that sometimes that is maybe one of the mistakes that we in not just in community but within ourselves, this idea that we're going to get to sort of the right track and the right path and it's going to stay like that. I love the way Cynthia Winward talks about this on At Last She Said It. She has this phrase that she uses all the time, which is this worked for me until it didn't. You know, and I think the garden was working until it didn't. You know, I think that will continue to happen with all of us. And I think the more that we can be aware that that's actually the unavoidable thing happening to all of us, even if you want to just grab on so tight, you are spiritually growing. There are things that are not working for you anymore. Actually, there's this great quote that I actually pulled up from Jared Halverson. He said, "Is doubt a gift? Depends on what you do with it. Is faith a gift? Depends on what you do with it. Is any gift a gift? Depends on what you do with it." Anything that draws you closer to God is inspired of him. Mormon tells us that, which means anything that draws us away is not a gift anymore, and it has become a curse to us. And we're the only ones who can make the call whether or not something has turned from a gift to a curse in our hands. And so I wish that there were straightforward answers with this, Patrick, but I don't think this exists on this topic. Like, this story is just full of, sorry, there's no clear answer. What are you going to do? What are you going to do in the face of uncertainty? And you know what I think is encouraging about uncertainty, and I think should almost excite us, is that from my view, I look at all of the stories that I've ingested my whole life, all the stories that have really moved me, and we are so moved as a people and as spirits by moral courage, and uncertainty is the only thing that makes that possible. We love when someone, I actually think it's what makes all art work. I think that it's that we have a feeling that that artist didn't know if what they were saying was going to work or not. They had no idea if that album was going to connect with anybody else, or if what they were doing was too vulnerable or too weird and it was going to make people recoil. And there is something about that bravery and that moral courage that honestly inspires and invites and connects us all. And so even though it's terrible that we don't get to be certain in this, it's actually an invitation for us to be beautiful, like at our most beautiful.
So I just love everything you said. And I just want to reiterate how much this is how the story starts. This is,
yes.
you know, this isn't how, okay, I walk my people along for, you know, several books of the Old Testament. And then I break it to you gently. Okay, it's going to be hard. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be complexity. It's from the very, very beginning. God says, no, this will be complex. You will have to make difficult decisions. You're going to have to do this in collaboration with other people. You're going to have to kind of try to decipher messages from me. And I love what you said. And you're going to have courage. You're going to have to go forward with courage. And I think I love how you said that that's art. I think that's also true in my field in politics, where the people that we memorialize and that we think of as being sort of great leaders were always people who took a convicted moral stance in a very difficult moment and said, I feel strongly that this is the direction that we need to move, but only time would bear that out. It wasn't always clear that things would work out, but they were willing to kind of risk in order to do the right thing. And I think that one of the things that I'm struck with is how much it was in the interest of, I don't know, forces that want us confused to flatten that story from the very beginning. To say, oh no, to go back to the way you were describing it in the beginning, instead of Eve being a complex character, she's a flat character. She's the bad guy. She broke the system, right?
Yes.
And that for those who want things to be simple and simplistic, that story has been manipulated from the very beginning. And if we really want to know how God works with us and really want to know how we are going to have to move through the world, we have to address the complexity in this story. And so I'm so appreciative of the way you've done that.
Well, and I love what you're saying. Don't you think God sees us all as complex? Yeah. I think that God can appreciate our nuance in a way that we can only dream of appreciating our own nuance and each other's nuance. And it makes us all so much more interesting. Again, like from a character standpoint, from writing characters and from playing characters. It's the characters who have very justified motives, but also often contradictory things. We love a character that is like genuinely so misguided in some ways, but has a deep, 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 beautiful quality as well. Like one of my favorite movies of the past couple of years was The Holdovers. Every character in that movie, if you watch it, it's rated R. Sorry, but it's very good. It was written so well.
You know
All
what?
the
The Old
characters
Testament's rated R too, so
I think so too. I believe it's very rated R. But in that movie, all the characters are they're all kind of jerks, but they also like you'll see how they defend each other in these difficult moments. And I think one of the reasons we're so attracted to characters like that is because we relate and we understand that actually we are all battling with these different parts of ourselves, and that's what this story is about. It's about being nuanced. It's about being a person who actually doesn't know the future as well and never can, and therefore leans on God in the mystery. That's what we're all here for. That's why the three of us are obsessed with this topic and with spiritual growth in general. It is the thing that guides us toward that guides us toward God and kind of continues to help us lean into mystery and our own beauty.
You think there's any risks in that? Do you think there are any risks? What we're talking about is spiritual growth or increased spiritual maturity. What?
Yeah.
Do we leave anything behind?
I mean, what's the alternative, Patrick?
Yeah.
What do we think the alternative is? Because part of the reason I'm like pretty sure that spiritual growth is unavoidable is because all our cells will turn over even if we do nothing. You know what I mean? So I don't think we get to just stay. And so I guess there are risks, I guess, I'm saying this in a roundabout way. The risks are losing track of God, losing track of ourselves, losing track of each other, having no ground, not knowing what steps to take, making huge mistakes, hurting each other, hurting ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there's pretty much nothing but risk, but also the idea of trying to stay. I think that's worse. I think stasis is worse for our souls, or at least I think because it's a type of denial. My dad said this amazing thing to me. He had open heart surgery 2 years ago, and when he was like on his meds while he was recovering afterward, he was just this like Buddha. I loved it so much. We would go on these walks and we just talked about God. And at one point he said to me, like, Mallory, it's so important that we're completely honest before God, because if not, we're hiding from him and then he can't help us. So even if we're angry at him, confused, frustrated, like completely fed up, we need to be honest or else we're hiding from God and he can't help us. And so from that, I take that denial is really just a way of hiding from God. And when you look at it from the point of like an addict, they can't start the 12-step program until they can admit that their life is unmanageable. That's honesty. Honesty before God, being able to say, okay, I hate to admit it, but these are my ingredients. What can I make with these ingredients? I know I need to make something because I don't know what else to do. And I think that's really why we're all creative beings, is because we're all just trying to figure out what to create with what's in front of us. But we can't do it unless we're honest. And I think that the risk of just staying in denial, everything's fine right where I am in the garden. I'm just going to stay right here. I'm going to ignore my questions. I'm too afraid to ask them, or I just don't want to do the wrong thing. I'm so afraid of doing the wrong thing that I'm going to sit in this feeling of my soul being completely appalled. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I'm like, I do think it's avoidable. I think even if it takes you 20 years, eventually you move out of that garden. No? So maybe what we're doing a lot of the time is, first of all, just trying to give ourselves grace, even if it does take us 20 years to leave the garden. And then also, recognizing that we don't have to do this alone, that like inertia and the physical forces of this universe will eventually help us move if we're having a hard time doing so. And maybe that's a wild thing to say, but it's how it feels for me.
I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And I think that's a sort of underappreciated part of the story is of Adam and Eve, is that, God can deal with their eating the fruit. God can deal even with them like blaming each other or blaming, it's like the other guy, right?
It was
but it's when they're hiding that they can't have the conversation. Right.
Yeah.
And there's other stories about this throughout the Old Testament where like God is calling us out of hiding, like Jonah trying to run away. Right.
Yes.
I mean, all these kinds of like God just wants to come out of hiding and like face it and be honest and have the conversation. Now that's super hard. I hide all the time. I hide from God. I hide from myself. I hide from other people. And I think maybe one of the lessons here is to try to stop hiding.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is brutal.
Yeah.
Like it's just absolutely brutal. But it's that's why we love the work of Brené Brown so much. You know, she basically talks about how there's a big difference between fitting in and belonging. And I love the idea that because fitting in implies hiding, I think, in this conversation.
Because we hide behind other people, right? Yeah.
We hide behind other people. We hide behind the expectations of what it means to fit in into this group. But to belong is to be fully seen and accepted for who we are. And in all of our relationships, in every type of love, you can't feel fully loved until people know you. And man, I learned that so much, even just from my experience of being decently well known in a small area for a little while. That feeling of, oh, I'm getting all this attention, but it actually doesn't feel like love. It feels like something else. And that's because until people really know you, it doesn't actually feel like love. And so I think that what I love about Brené Brown is that she's just taught us. I mean, I truly think she's a type of prophet. I think that she's like, in terms of what we're talking about with people being called to uncover different truths, I think she's helping immensely with human beings' spiritual evolution, our ability to be able to see that vulnerability is bravery and equate that with strength instead of weakness, to be able to bring ourselves in honesty forward to each other and allow each other to love each other more fully. I mean, what beautiful work to do in the world. But that the vulnerability is essentially the secret sauce to all of the best things in life, to creating art that's impactful, to political movements that actually make a difference, and to letting people love us and to letting them feel safe to also be vulnerable. I mean, it's gorgeous.
So let me ask you a question. And this is maybe the hardest question we're going to ask you. So I apologize in advance.
It's okay.
We have talked, I think we all agree that spiritual growth requires this willingness to embrace complexity. We have to be honest. We have to come forward and be aware of who we are. We have to have courage, all of these things. We don't live alone. So let's go back to this very first, the way we were sort of talking about this in the discussion at the beginning. If I over-index on my own personal growth and my own development, I have watched people do this. Well, I have to live my truth, and they blow up the lives of people around them, right? And Adam and Eve, that's one of the problems, is both of them, the way they were making decisions, they were harming each other and sort of in some ways blowing up each other's possibilities because they didn't do it together. So what are your strategies for growing as a human being true to yourself, growing spiritually, but doing that while maintaining and sustaining and nurturing relationships with people who might have a range of emotions in reactions to your growth? It might be fear. It might be discomfort. It might be horror, right? They might not agree with the decisions that the person growing is making. They might be afraid of what it reveals about the fact that they're not growing. I mean, the whole range of human expression happens because we don't do these growth alone. So I guess my question for you is, what are your strategies and your spiritually sensitive, disciple-driven strategies that help you be Christ-like in relationship to the people around you while you are embracing this journey of growth?
I mean, I think that the nice thing, see yourself as a complicated human being. And I hope that, a lot of the time when I feel like we get talking about self-compassion, for example, we can think that there's something indulgent about it, but actually being able to see ourselves as a complex human being who's doing their best is actually one of the best things we can do for the collective as well, because we're so much better at being able to extend grace to other people when we are extending it to ourselves. And so the nice built-in thing about doing this scary hard work is that often it requires us to be able to be in a conversation with God about grace. And then we're able to extend it to people who don't understand us as well, to say, oh man, I completely understand what it's like to feel complicated feelings. I feel that every day while I'm doing this, So I actually think that in some ways being able to learn that compassion, to be able to have true charity for yourself that extends out, because oftentimes I don't think that we talk about this enough, but one of the reasons that we feel like almost every judgment that we have for another person is based on something that we judge ourselves for. And as we slowly release those tension points, Like, for example, if we weren't to be able to fully acknowledge, like if we were to feel like, well, that person's so close-minded. They're so close-minded about what's going on with me, and I just have no patience for it. I can't have that in my life. It's toxic or whatever. And not acknowledge all the times that we've been close-minded. That's probably why we're so uncomfortable with their close-mindedness. But the more that we're like aware, I was so close-minded earlier today, and it's because I'm human. It's because it's so nice to feel like I can just have a black and white idea of this world. It feels so much safer. But if you sit down and you're able to have that conversation with yourself, I can guarantee you that when that person's close-minded, you can say, me too, brother. Isn't it hard out here? It's so much easier. But I do think you have to extend that to yourself. You have to examine when we're triggered by each other. And when somebody really brings up something in me, it's almost always because I have zero self-compassion on a certain, which means I cannot have compassion for them either. I'm not acknowledging that I am just as guilty of this thing, almost always. So in a strange way, one of my most useful tools is just a regular self-compassion practice. Really being able to do that work of sitting down and saying, okay, you're a person, so hard. This is so hard. What would you like to do next? How can we consult God with what we do next? I think is extremely helpful in how we can extend that to others as well. It starts with us. It really does.
I think that gives a whole new lens or perspective on the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
So I really like the way that you're thinking about that kind of self-compassion actually doesn't come in the way of, but actually facilitates the ability to connect with, be generous towards, be compassionate towards others.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask, you are a very creative person. You make your living out of being creative. Of course, creativity takes lots of different forms. What is the relationship for you between tension and conflict and creativity? And you could take this either in a kind of, your professional life or maybe relationally or other things. But how do tension and conflict for you create the opportunities or grounds or maybe even the necessary materials for creativity?
Well, it is truly the necessary materials. I think you put that so well. I don't feel like I have an idea until I feel like it's complex enough that I don't know how it's going to end. When I'm telling a story or when I'm trying to figure out. So what I've been doing for the past several years since I moved to LA is the quiet work of developing TV shows and pitching them and never making them. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. But I have developed several TV shows while I've been out here and pitched a bunch of movies. And what that basically means is that you have to think like, what could sustain an entire season of TV? What kind of story could sustain for a full 90 minutes? And I don't feel like I have a story until it's really until you're essentially having an argument that is kind of like we were discussing at the beginning. We're both the villain and the good guy, which is not always just good and evil, but sometimes just the prevailing wisdom
conflict.
Versus.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not until you really feel like there's something there where every time both characters speak, your head goes, well, maybe they're right, that you really feel like you have something to dive into. So I definitely feel like conflict is extremely necessary. The tension, that's what we find interesting as people. We want to see how it works out. And we also appreciate the mystery of it, I think, because it's so familiar to us. Like we really, really understand that it feels very, very familiar to not know what's going to happen next, to not know what the right decision is. So I think there's something very satisfying about telling stories that way. And I'll say that from a more spiritual perspective, I've been writing songs for therapy since I was a teenager. And especially in the last 10 years, it was after I had a very dear friend pass away 11 years ago. And it was really, really rough. There were days where I just didn't know what to do other than with all of the horrible feelings that come with somebody, especially I was 25 at the time and he had died very suddenly. And so to just have someone snatched from existence, it definitely spurred on a spiritual upheaval for me. Even though you think you understand the world, something like that happens and it's an immediate tectonic shift. I actually kind of think I secretly believed that this couldn't happen, and it did. I think that's the way that sort of thing goes. And so I don't know. I think one of the things I regularly feel God whisper to me sometimes when I'm like really tempted to just completely shrink into a puddle or a pile is, you can make something with this. Even this, you can make something with this. And somehow the therapeutic songwriting has been the best example of that for me, that, hey, it's actually, if this is causing you deep, deep despair, do you think it's something you could write a song about? Over time, the songs have become like lullabies for myself. I'll write them when I'm often in a place where I just feel like I don't know what to do next. All I could think to do was write a song. That feels very real to me, that God calls us to make things with these impossible ingredients sometimes because we just don't know what else to do other than make something. And I also think there's another element to this too, which is that it makes me think of my favorite scripture, which is 1 Nephi 11:16-17. Knowest thou the condescension of God? I know that he loveth his children. Nevertheless, I do not know the meaning of all things. And that is also very present for me, that sometimes it's not about the conflict that makes me, like, there's tension in my life. There's all this stuff. I don't know what to do with this horrible thing. What if I made a funny video? Feels totally disconnected. So you have something like that goes right into the heart of it. Let's create something with these ingredients. And then occasionally it's like, hey, but don't forget that the world is great. Don't forget that God loves you. You don't know everything, but I do know God loves you. I do know God loves me. And sometimes that's the thing that I get from conflict and tension, which is this reminder, like, yes, horrible things, but also do not forget all these good things. Don't forget that God made you love making people laugh. Don't forget about that. Actually, can I read you a poem? Can I read you a poem? I didn't write it. It's Mary Oliver, but this is a good example of that to me, that it's like when we're tempted, I think, to just get swallowed up in this concern. Like, the truth is, life is scary. There are lots of things to be scared of. The only prophecy we definitely know will come true about our lives is that we're going to die. It's like horrifying. It's hard. Well, she wrote this poem called I Worried, and I feel like it sums up so often why I create and how I create. She says, I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up. And I took my old body and went out into the morning and sang, she's the best. I love her so much. Sometimes you just have to create because it's the only thing that makes sense,
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been an absolutely delightful conversation, and we're just really appreciative of you being willing to take the time and share so much of your dear soul with us. It's been really, really a lovely journey. We close all of these conversations always with a question, which is sort of a bookend to the one at the beginning, which is, where do you find peace? We now know where Mary Oliver does.
I know.
But what about Mallory? Like, how do you access and find it?
Yeah, I find peace walking outside in the morning. I love the grace of the morning. I think it's such a great way to start a day. And I find so much peace from reading and listening to what I think of as my soul teachers, like the scriptures, obviously, but also people living and dead who seem to connect to truths that really, really resonate with my spirit, remind me who I am, what I'm made of, and how precious this day is. And I find peace through listening to gospel music, even during the week. Sometimes when I need it, the more upbeat, the better, in my opinion. That helps me a lot. I went through a phase for a while where I was very, very anxious, like physically anxious. And I found that really somber or too sedate, like basically if the BPM was too low, it was like, I can't actually. And I needed something that would like make me clap about God. I was like, I need Jesus and clapping at the same time, please. Jesus and dancing. But I think maybe more than anything, people make me feel peace, sometimes faster than anything. I think of this poem that I got from, I love poems, obviously. I think they're so helpful. But there was this poem that John, by the way, shared. in an old talk. I listened to it on a tape when I was like 12. It was an anonymous poem. It was, I tried to find myself I could not see. I tried to find my God, but he eluded me. I tried to find my brother, and then I found all three. And I think it's because we can see the face of God in each other, but we can also see each other in each other. There's so much peace in being able to say, me too, me too. I don't know what's going on either. And I find so much peace in that we're here together. Sometimes even, especially with how tumultuous today feels, I'm glad we're here together. I'm glad I'm not here by myself trying to figure this out, that we're here in this time period together with our full minds and full hearts trying to make sense of this.
Amazing. Mallory, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
We really appreciate all your insights.
Such a treat. You're both so beautiful. Thank you for doing what you're doing
Thank you.
and for having this massive impact. I mean, personally, I just think that your podcast is such a beautiful project. I'm so honored to be a part of it. And thank you for having me today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Proclaim Peace. To hear more, you can subscribe on a podcast app of your choice or on YouTube. You can always find full show notes or transcriptions at proclaimpeace.org.
Proclaim Peace is a partnership between MWEG and Waymakers. You can learn more about Waymakers at waymakers.us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.